So what the hell's going on here exactly? And why are we damn near at each other's throats? Look at what happened in the United States a week and a half ago. There's some things to talk about here, and I started to try to talk about them. And I would say that my freedom to do so was rapidly infringed upon. My career was put at risk. And I find this absolutely unacceptable because I am trying to sort this out. And believe me, you know what you call people you can't talk to? Enemies. And if we want to divide our society into armed camps of enmity, all we have to do is keep doing what we're doing. And I would recommend that we don't do this. I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time. I know what happens when things get out of control, and it can happen extraordinarily rapidly. And I would say we're on the cusp of that. And so we need to start talking and listening.
The same administration that declared a safe space because of a costume says it's okay for one of its students to sell hoodies that say all white people are racist. The same student also marketed hoodies reading, quote, "If I encounter another cop with a God complex, I'm going to have to show the world that they are human." And the administration has nothing to say about that. UW said, in this case, the individuals involved are exercising their rights to free speech and engaging in a private activity unrelated to their status as student. Ah, I get it. So now free speech is okay.
The more our society enforces its increasingly absurd demands for equity upon everyone, the less likely it is that such natural divisions will be able to manifest themselves in our society in keeping with the pronounced and deep differences between the genders.
Because if you're constantly on the lookout to be a victim and you think you can act with violence to people who victimize you, you're going to end up hurting other people. You will. You will end up doing bad things and hurting other people. It is important that we all get out of this victim group mentality and fight that mentality at every turn. Here's the truth. America is the safe space, and nobody cares enough to victimize you. No one cares about you. Your parents do. My kids care about me. My wife cares about me. My parents care about me. Nobody else cares about me. Great. I don't want people bothering me. I don't want people telling me things I can't do. The more, you may have noticed this from leftist government, the more people say they care about you, the more they want to bother you.
Part of the problem for conservatives is that for 30 years, we take the whole field of the battle, we pick the tiny corner of it called elections, and we fight there. The left, meanwhile, does the long march through academia and elementary and secondary schools, through Broadway and Hollywood, through the media and the culture more generally. And a lot of the political issues that we lose have been fought already and won in the cultural sphere where we are not even fighting.
There's two things that we kind of know about why clinical psychology works, and one is that people get stronger if they voluntarily expose themselves to things they're afraid of and that they're disgusted by. It's a hallmark of clinical psychotherapy, and I would say it's also the defining characteristic of appropriate human adaptation, right? Is that you have to confront the chaotic things that you don't understand and then learn to master them and articulate them. And the other is that clinical psychotherapy works because people can come, say, into my office and they can say whatever they have to say, no matter how incoherent it is or how psychotic it is or how overbearing it is or confused or jumbled. And sometimes it takes my clients months or years of continual conversation just to start to untie the hundreds of thousands of knots that have been badly tied in their minds. So, and that's partly why I don't believe that freedom of speech is just another value. I think that's preposterous. I think that if you claim that, then you know nothing about Western civilization and history. Is freedom of speech is not just another principle. It's the mechanism by which we keep our psyches and our societies organized, and we have to be unbelievably careful about infringing upon that, because we're infringing upon the process by which we keep chaos and order balanced, you know. And if chaos and order go out of balance, then all hell breaks loose, and the situation is not good. And we've seen that happen many, many times in the 20th century, right? Since the late 1800s, our societies, Western societies, have been careening madly between the hyper-repressive order of the radical right and the absolute devouring chaos of the radical left. We've become unmoored. We've lost our bearings.
In America, nobody cares about you. It's your job to make your way in the world, and nobody is going to get in your way because they don't spend every waking moment thinking about how to keep you down. They have other things to do. They have jobs, they have lives, they have children, they have wives, they have husbands, they have lovers. I mean, they have everything going on in their own life. They don't have time to worry about the whiny snowflake who's here on a state subsidy tuition. They don't. So the idea that you need a safe space from all these people, they don't care enough about you to worry about how to stop you. And that's the wonderful thing about America. And that's why we have to fight for every shred of freedom that we can keep. We have to fight every shred of political correctness. We have to stop this nonsense, because the more of this fascistic nonsense there is, the more talk about social justice and white privilege and safe spaces and trigger warnings and microaggressions, the more of this nonsense there is, the less freedom there will be. And if we don't maintain that freedom, there will be no safe space for anyone.
You know, because there's things to talk about, and if we don't talk about them, then we're going to fight. Well, what is this all about? I can list you some of the things that it's about. It's about inclusion versus bigotry and prejudice, right? It's about the left wing versus the right wing. It's about who's free to choose their language and what elements of respect that you're due to people who are different than you, say with regards to pronoun use or chosen names. It's about also the adversarial spirit, I would say, versus the logos. That's at the deepest possible level of analysis. And the adversarial spirit is the spirit that claims what I think right now is correct above all else, and I have nothing whatsoever to learn, versus the logos. And the logos is a very complex idea, and maybe the deepest idea of humanity, I would say, certainly the deepest idea of Western civilization, and that's that the proper citizen is the person who embodies truth in speech and attempts to act it out. And that also includes listening, because listening is part of communicative intent. And I think at the moment that we're embroiled in a war on every single one of those dimensions.
I think one of the great handicaps that blacks and other minorities face across the country is that they are systematically mismatched with universities in the admissions process. That is, if Harvard feels that it must have X% of blacks, and if the pool is such that they can't get X% of blacks at the same level as the rest of the Harvard students, they're going to take those blacks who would have succeeded in some state university and bring them to Harvard, where many of them will fail. Or MIT is a better example, that the average black student at MIT is in the bottom 10% of MIT students in math. But he is in the top 90% of all American students in math, because MIT students are so phenomenal in mathematics. Something like 1/4 of all the black students going to MIT do not graduate. You're talking about a pool of people who score at the 90th percentile in math, whom you are artificially turning into failures by mismatching them with the school. Back in much earlier, you had a great increase of blacks in the universities through the GI Bill. You had nothing like that kind of attrition from that process, because the student went wherever he could be accepted, wherever he met the normal standards, and the government simply paid the money.
Noting that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that mandatory anti-racism and anti-bias training has the impact that is claimed. In fact, the empirical evidence suggests quite the contrary. When you mandate that sort of thing, you actually make people more prejudiced. It's also based on what I would say is a rather pernicious form of pseudoscience that's being promoted by social psychologists, a group that I have a fair bit of trouble with, and that's being transformed into a kind of educational fascism that has no grounding whatsoever in the empirical literature.
One of the sad things that happens with any organization over a period of time is that as it fulfills its mission, it looks for new missions, because organizations don't die quietly. And I think there are many, many problems that need to be addressed in the black community. Not all of them can be addressed with either the rhetoric or the strategies of the 1950s. But people tend to, generals fight the last war over and over again, and I think that's what's happening here.
When you talk, it doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean you're correct, right? It means you're trying to articulate and formulate your thoughts like the boneheaded moron that you are. And you're going to stumble around idiotically, because what the hell do you know? You're full of biases and you're ignorant and you can't speak very well and you're over-emotional. And, you know, you've got just problems that you can hardly even imagine that are interfering with your ability to state something clear. And so what you do is you do your best to say what you mean, and then you listen to other people tell you why you're a blithering idiot, and hopefully you can correct yourself to some degree as a consequence of listening to them. And you see, that's what free speech is about, because you have to, it isn't just that people can organize themselves and their societies by thinking. You can't do that because there's only one of you. What you have to do is you have to articulate your thoughts in a public forum so that other people can attack you, and hopefully in a corrective manner. And then you want to, you know, step back a little bit and think, okay, well, you know, I was a little arrogant there and I was a little over emotional there and I didn't get that quite right, and maybe I'm outright biased on that front. And you want to correct what you say, because then you correct how you are, and then you correct how you act in life, and then you correct your society. And to the degree that we limit freedom of expression, we put all of that at risk.
How is it that the anti-fascists in America today and on the campus look and sound and behave like the early fascists? How is it possible to conduct anti-fascism in a fascist way? What licenses this display of unbelievable intimidation, intolerance, and fear in the name of fighting it? This seems, on the face of it, paradoxical.
So I'm going to read you something that a graduate student sent me from the University of Toronto the other day, and I can also tell you that I've received hundreds of letters like this. Today, I had a tutorial at the University of Toronto where I talked about Jordan Peterson and issues of personal identity, legally sanctioned identity categories, etc. I brought up a video of a tall white man in his 30s who asked students at a university how they'd react if he told them he identified as a woman, as black, as short, and as 5 years old. Spoiler alert. Students in the video resist some of the later categories a bit, but are mostly accepting. Still, students were not engaging in discussion. I asked them why. One said it was because she was worried to share her opinion for fear of being singled out or saying something offensive. I asked who else was not speaking for that reason. The whole class put their hands up. That was shocking to me. I encouraged them to speak despite their worries, and they gave me some good feedback on how to make it easier for them to do so. For instance, by working in pairs and being assigned an opinion so that they didn't have to be responsible for it or feel bad for defending it. No participation. Why? They weren't uninterested. They were afraid to speak their minds. The PC police are in your heads.